Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Journey McBride, and I'm the Associate Director of Development for the UCR Library. I love to know where folks are from, so please feel free to drop in your chat box what city you're tuning in from. Well, welcome to the Faculty Profiles of Research, Art, and Innovation, featuring Dr. Clifford Trafzer. We created this series as a way for us to engage UCR scholarship, our library collections and activities with the UCR community and to the public at large. At this time, I would like to introduce Cherry Williams, the UCR Library's Director of Distinctive Collections, home of the renowned Ruber Costo Library of the American Indian.
Thank you, Janine, very much, and welcome to everyone to our second gathering highlighting faculty profiles in research, art, and innovation. Today, we will be in conversation with Dr. Cliff Trafzer and UCR University librarian Stephen Mandeville Gamble, exploring Dr. Trafzer's work, Fighting Invisible Enemies Among Southern California Indians, 1900 to 1950. But quickly, a few ground rules. Please be aware that this event is being recorded, and due to the large number of attendees, all participants are muted. So please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask a question. However, we will be monitoring the chat box, and we have saved time following their discussion for your questions. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our panel discussants. Stephen Mandeville Gamble has been the university librarian at the University of California, Riverside since March 2013. Prior to coming to UCR, he held the position of Associate University Librarian for Collections and Scholarly Communication at George Washington University, Head of Special Collections at North Carolina State University, and Assistant Department Head and Principal Manuscripts Processing Librarian at the Stanford University Libraries Department of Special Collections and University Archives. He holds a master's in Library and Information Studies from UC Berkeley and an MA in Anthropology from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor and an AB in Anthropology from Stanford University. During his studies, he read extensively about Native American culture, history, and archaeology. He had the opportunity to observe early conversations that led Stanford to voluntarily repatriate Native American ancestors and to participate in archaeological digs overseen by Ohlone elders to document the seasonal migration of Ohlone villagers from bayshore locales to coastal range mountains in order to secure food resources. And our distinguished panelist today, Dr. Cliff Trafzer, is Distinguished Professor of History and Ruber Costo Chair in American Indian Affairs at UCR, where he has taught for 29 years. With a team of faculty and students, he has taught at Navajo Community College, Washington State University, and San Diego State University, where he served as Chair of American Indian Studies for 8 years. For 22 years, Trafzer served on the California Native American Heritage Commission, which protects Native American ancestral remains and sacred sites. In 2018, the Western History Association awarded him the Lifetime Achievement Award in American Indian History from the Western History Association. He has published several books, including Native Universe, the inaugural book of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, Death Stalks the Yakima, Epidemiological Transitions and Mortality on the Yakima Indian Reservation, 1880 to 1964, and a Chimawavy song, Resiliency of a Southern Paiute Tribe. In May 2020, the University of Arizona Press accepted his book manuscript, Strong Hearts and Healing Hands, Southern California Indians and Field Nurses 1900 to 1950, a sequel to Fighting Invisible Enemies, Health and Medical Transitions Among Southern California Indians, our topic this afternoon. In addition, Professor Trafzer used the Costo Library during his research of Fighting Invisible Enemies and is also our benefactor on another side, joining with the library and using some of his Costo funds to support the purchase of the new furniture in the Costo Room. The Costo Room houses the collections of Rupert and Jeanette Costo and is a particular favorite study spot for students at UC River 5. Dr. Trafzer.
Well, we're waiting for Cliff's video to start. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your presence, and we're looking forward to a really dynamic conversation with Professor Cliff Trafzer.
Thank you. Now I'm rolling. In 1999, the Salmon Well Band of Mission Indians invited me to be a part of a week-long presentation to school children during American Indian Week. And while I was there was a table with two tribal elders, and I knew who they were, but they didn't know who I was. And I had never met them, and so I wanted to introduce myself. So it was Pauline Murillo and her mother, Martha Chacon. And while we were talking, I told them about my research on Southern California Indians and my interest in the field nurses who had worked among the tribes from 1928 to 1948. And while I was talking about the field nurses, Martha began rummaging in her purse and pulled out a photograph from 1936 of with her and Nurse Cowser and Dr. John Evans. And she held it up and said, "These were the nicest people. They cared about us and they helped us." So often in Native American history, we deal with negative interactions with others. But in this study, it's an issue of coming together and working together cooperatively to fight disease. My interest in reservation system began at Washington State University. While I was there, I decided I'd do a book on the Yakima. I had completed a book on the Palousas and wanted to go on with the Yakima. But as I was going through the materials in the National Archives, it was a lot of boring material that you have to wade through. So I asked the archivist if there was a finding aid to help me find some better materials. She said they had all of the death certificates from the Yakima Reservation. Would I like to see these? So I took a look at the death certificates and had not worked in statistical methodology, but I took some samples home with me and then sat down with a population geographer. And he told me this would be great material to work with, and it would tell us a lot about what was happening over time on a reservation in terms of health and mortality. So I returned to Seattle and the National Archives there and gathered nearly 4,000 death certificates. So the product of that was Death Stalks the Yakima. And then when I left Washington State University and took a job at San Diego State, I decided to do a study of Southern California Indian health because wherever I'm living, I know that I'm in Indian country, and I want to know something about the native people of that particular area. And this was a way of me coming to know Southern California people. So I began working in the 1990s on this study, transferring from Washington State to Southern California, getting to know the various tribes here, and we have many on multiple reservations. We have more reservations in Southern California than any other place in the United States. And so we have also recognized and unrecognized tribes. And I want to mention this because my study only deals with the recognized tribes that the United States had a formal relationship with. The unrecognized tribes, the Hashiman people, the Tongva people, some of the Chumashes, the Luceños and Kumeyaay who lived along the coast, they all lost their lands, had no reservation, and they were unrecognized from the 1850s forward. And so we don't have the kind of documentation that we have in the National Archives that we have for federally recognized tribes. So My study is of the Mission Indian Agency, now known as the Southern California Indian Agency, not the unrecognized tribes. So that is the study that still needs to be done. So I want to do a shout out to the National Endowment for the Humanities, because since the 1990s until 2016, 17, I just didn't have the time to devote to really focus razor sharp on this study. And the NEH provided me a research grant, and it allowed me the opportunity to spend time for a year away from teaching and any administrative work to work on the study. Also, the Rupert Costo Endowment is a wonderful opportunity and provided me opportunities to buy all kinds of materials, to travel to collections to get the study done. My sources are primarily written sources left by the Indian office. Doctors, nurses left reports. As I was going through the National Archives, I started finding in 1928 a report by a nurse. And then as I moved along, I started finding them for every year, every month. So I have 20 years of monthly reports from the field nurses who tell me a great deal because they were in everyone's homes throughout Southern California, from the Mexican border up into the Central Valley, and from the Coachella Valley to the Chumash people near the coast. So in addition, though, I wanted to have the Native voice and learn from Native folks. And it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done, the oral histories I've done in my life, because you're learning things that you will learn from no one else. The folks in the communities have knowledge that's been untapped. And so certain peoples have been very gracious to me, like Pauline Murillo, like Mrs. Chacon, and Joe Benitez, Matt Lavis, Lori Kachora. A number of people have opened up and shared with me not just the relationship with Western doctors, but how Native American medicine worked among their people. And I don't have a whole lot of time to be very specific, but generally speaking, I want to share with you that Native folks have had medicine ways for a long time, and not just herbal medicine. Every community, every clan, every family had people who had knowledge of plant medicine. But in additions within communities, you would find people who had knowledge of dentistry. You would have people with poison knowledge, how to deal with poison, especially rattlesnake bite or spider bites of all kinds. You had bone doctors who could repair bones, internalists who knew how to take care of sicknesses inside of you. I once went through a period at UCR where I lost my voice. And I still have some damage to my vocal cords because I continued to teach when I became ill and had a bad sore throat. And for months, 5 or 6 months, I could not speak. And I saw Western doctors, they provided me all kinds of medication. But in September of that year, some years ago, I had a Native American Heritage Commission meeting in Northern California. And so I drove out to pick up Catherine Sobel at the Morongo Reservation. And when I did, she of course realized that I couldn't speak very well at all. And so we flew up to Northern California, did our meeting, and came back. And then as we were flying home, she says, when we get back to Banning, I'm going to cure your throat. And she told me to go into the desert, to talk to the creosote plant, explain my problem, and ask for help. And then cut off the ends of the creosote plant, take that home and boil it, make me a tea. And so I did it that evening, the next morning. That next evening, something was, there was a reaction in my throat that I told my wife about. And ultimately, by Monday morning, I could speak as I'm speaking to you now. That kind of medicine ways was common knowledge and still is in the communities today. But in addition, there are special people within communities who are shaman, who are not taught to be healers, but who are given a gift. they would argue they are given the gift from their creator. And with that gift, they are able to get a hold of the healing power that is out there and then bring it to them, often with the use of a familiar, and then use that to then heal people. I interviewed Larry Eddy along the Colorado River about this because his grandfather was a shaman. And I asked him what his grandfather's familiar was. And he hesitated and was silent for about 1 minute. And I thought, oh, he may not know what I mean by familiar. But that wasn't it. He wasn't sure he wanted to tell me. And then in the interview that is taped, he explained that his grandfather would call his familiar by singing, and sing for many, many hours, many times. And that as a boy, Larry saw the familiar, which most people cannot see. And it came there, and then he was able to get a hold of it, and then he did his healing. That kind of belief system in that healing power is still prevalent among all the tribes here in Southern California and throughout the American West, throughout the Americas, that certain people have this power. Others may think this is fishtails that grow with the telling, as one reviewer once said about this in a book, but it is certainly a truism, a belief system of the people. Here locally, this belief is that Iva exists throughout the environment, and it exists in certain people, and that it came here at the beginning of time, and that Iva has power to decide who it will give it to and who it will take it from if it's used incorrectly. And then in doing ceremony, you're asking the power to come there, that healing power, and then through that, whatever means, to help other people to cure them. It's like a spider web that envelops the earth, but it concentrates in some areas. And that's why there are sacred places throughout Indian country, throughout Southern California. There are certain places that have a high concentration of power, and people go there to access power or to say prayers. The kind of sickness that the shaman often would tackle, in addition to using plant medicine, was fighting staying sickness. And staying sickness is a belief system that still exists among all tribes today. And that is that at the beginning of time, a certain tribe, whether it's Kumeyaay or Cahuilla or Chemehuevi, you're taught how to be Cahuilla, the correct way of being. And then if you violate that, there can be layers of illness that lay inside of you, and then it manifests itself. And it can manifest itself as a heart disease, as a brain tumor, as skin irritations, you name it, that it can do that. And then the job of the shaman is to find out what it was that you have done or what you have inside of you, and then pull that out of you and take it away. So in talking to Pauline Murillo, she told me that her mother as a little girl had been playing up at San Manuel with her cousin. And as they were playing near an arroyo, a shaman by the name of Ormego came out of the arroyo and told the kids to go away. Don't play here because I've left something down there. So I don't want you to be down there. And so the kids ran off, and then he left the area. And of course they doubled back down in the arroyo. And soon after getting down there, Martha Chacon became, then known as Martha Manuel, became ill. And so she got back to her house, and the family called Dr. Evans. And Dr. Evans drove up and got the child, took her down to the hospital, and for 3 or 4 days did all kinds of testing, and finally told the family, she is clearly ill, but I don't know what's wrong with her. We can't find anything physically wrong with her. And at that point, the family said, well, this must be our sickness, staying sickness. And so they put her in a wagon and took her to Palm Springs to Pedro Chino, who laid her out by the hot springs where the new museum is going in. and then sang and prayed and called on his power, and ultimately was able to find what was wrong with her in her leg. She had picked up this bad negative thing that made her sick. And then he was able to take it out of her, and she woke up immediately and explained what her and her cousin had done. She also said that she saw multiples of a little man running around her leg. And as she described it, she was describing either her great-grandfather or great-grandfather, who was Santos Manuel, who was Pacuma, and he was a shaman as well. So learning from people in the community informs me, and then by writing the book, to share with others these ways of thinking about medicine. But also the people of San Manuel were one of the first to invite Western medicine into their lives. In the 1890s, there was one doctor, Dr. Wainwright, who was supposed to serve all Native people of Southern California who were part of the Mission Indian Agency, that include people in the Central Valley and all the way to the Pacific coast among the Chumash and all the way to the Mexican border. So you can see he couldn't do a very good job, but he is still well known in the communities for the work that he did. But then in the early 20th century, the Office of Indian Affairs started hiring contract doctors. They were part-timers, and people could go to them, but they weren't outreaching very much. A major change occurred in 1924, though, when we received a new Secretary of Interior, Hubert Work. And Work was a World War I veteran, a medical doctor, a colonel in the United States Army, and he had worked with nurses in Europe and knew their value, where nurses had not been used in Southern California. They had not been hired. And so what he did, he nudged the Office of Indian Affairs to hire 2 public health nurses and place them on 2 reservations, not here, but in the Lakota country and the Hickory Apache country, just as an experiment. And for 2 years, they did a marvelous job. And he decided that he would hire one of them as the superintendent of all nurses in the United States and start a nursing corps. So in 1924 is when the nursing corps got launched here in the United States. And we received our first field nurse in 1928. Her name was Florence Mcclintock. And she went to the Morongo Reservation. She lived in Banning, but she went to the Morongo Res initially because she didn't have a car. So she walked the reservation, knocking on doors and introducing herself to people. And what the nurses would do, because not one of them could speak a native language. And so they would learn from young people who had been to school, those who could still speak their language and could speak English, and ask them to help them as interpreters, as helpers. And Martha Chacon did this on her reservation, for example. Martha had gone to St. Boniface Indian School and then to public schools. And she could speak Cahuilla, Serrano, and English, and probably some Spanish as well. So Florence Mcclintock set the pattern for all the field nurses throughout Southern California by using used cars to travel to all the reservations and knock on doors, visit with people. And this, of course, took time to get to know people, but what evolved was a trust relationship. Didn't come immediately, but it came over time when positive things were happening. And I asked Catherine Sobel and other elders, why did you allow these white women, they were all white women and all single, why did you allow them into your homes? And the answer from everyone is the same. We had diseases and problems, children were dying, and these were things that we could not deal with because these were diseases brought to us by non-Indians, by settlers. And so they had knowledge that we didn't have, and it just made common sense that we needed their help. And what developed was this wonderful cooperative relationship of trust between people. So for 20 years, the field nurses worked, and the Saboba Indian Hospital was set up, a small facility here. There was the tubercular hospital in Phoenix, where they took most children, some to other sands as well. But families decided that they would allow their children and their family members, others, adults, to go to the sanatoriums so that they could receive the help that they needed for tuberculosis, which was the major killer. So this is really a positive story until 1928. We go through the Great Depression, and we go through World War II, and then in the aftermath of the war, the Republican Party, they did not take the presidency, but they took Congress, and there was a move to get out of the Indian business. It's called termination and relocation. And eventually, by the 1950s, there's a major move to cut expenses, cut Indian programs, and get out of the Indian business. And unfortunately, all of the nurses were let go by 1950. The contract doctors and full-time doctors were let go. They closed the Saboba Hospital, and everything that had been built in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s collapsed. And it's only come back here recently by the work, the self work of various tribes, the sovereignty within the tribes to decide that this was unacceptable. And so they have created their own medical system. And they do receive funding from the Indian Health Service, but the Indian Health Service does not run Indian health here. It's our tribal people who do it through Riverside San Bernardino Indian Health. So it's another positive story that has not been explored by historians. I'll leave it at that and open it up for questions.
Cliff, thanks so much. I really appreciate your words. I know that you know that I've got a number of questions. I think I will ask the first question just to get things rolling. But in the meantime, if the members of the audience would like to start writing questions into the chat, we will make sure that we get to them. So, Cliff, many pundits describe our current worldwide pandemic as unprecedented. We hear the word unprecedented all the time. And yet, just 100 years ago, right here, Native Americans were facing a very infectious disease that had a high mortality rate in the form of tuberculosis, all while dealing with government agencies and actors with conflicting motives. So there was a disjointed response. Some government agencies were clearly indifferent. Others were actively hoping the Native Americans would simply disappear from the land. And yet others, as you described, especially the nurses and Dr. Wirt, really were trying to figure out how to share public health information to help Native American communities not only survive, but thrive. What parallels do you see between the situation 100 years ago and what we're now facing ourselves?
Well, it seems to me that the Native people of Southern California were quick learners. They, as I said, what the elders tell us, that they were suffering from these deaths, multiple deaths. The death rates were very high in comparison to the general population of the United States. Just a quick statistic on tuberculosis: between 1925 and 1927, now this is an average, moving average of crude death rates. The crude death rate among Southern California Indians was 415 per 100,000 population, but it was only 84 in the United States. So it's many times greater, per population, So what I see is that Native people were listening and learning, and because they were suffering and had been for some time, that tuberculosis and other infectious diseases were nothing to mess around with. They had a lot of experience of burying people, and then the threat of having tuberculosis within the home, and then not knowing that person had TB because they weren't doing X-rays. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had no X-ray machine out here until the 1940s, and it cost money, and so the BIA did not want to be hauling people in for x-rays. And so they used stethoscopes, which are not a good instrument to be finding tuberculosis, especially in its early stages, so that you might be able to arrest the TB. So what I see is that we have known about public health since the 1880s, the 1890s. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs learned more about it after 1904, because the Commissioner of Indian Affairs did not believe that Indians could have tuberculosis. It was an urban disease in the 19th century. So it just couldn't be that Indian people who lived out of doors and, and hunted and fished and traveled and rode horseback and, seemed so healthy that he had a hard time in Washington, D.C., believing that TB was really bad. So he sent out a circular in 1903 and was inundated with information about TB in 1904. But the problem then, and it continued into the 1920s, was funding from the Congress. The Congress had very little interest in funding the fight against tuberculosis among Native people. Not understanding that if Native folks have tuberculosis, it can be spread to non-Indian communities as well, because people were working and going beyond the reservations. Nobody was staying at home. Everybody was traveling and working in order to make a living. So the parallels are there, and we have had pandemics, since ancient times that we know of, and then epidemics in the United States again and again. But imagine, it just recently, recent in historical terms, in 1918 and 1919, that 50 million people, died. 50 million, and so we should have knowledge. Just basic school children should have knowledge of health, but for Congress or congressmen and people in Congress and the Senate and governors not to have this knowledge of how disease works and not to listen to people with knowledge is appalling to me. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're getting a lot of questions coming in. So let's see. So David Rios, who's the librarian here in the library here at UC Riverside, is wondering where the oral histories are housed.
Yeah. Well, right now they are housed here at my house because for the most part I don't record. I sit and take notes, and then I type them up and I send them back to the person or their family, even those people who can't speak English, so that somebody in the family will read it to that person to make sure that I got it right. And then after I write something and have used the oral interviews, then I return them to that community to have them read it and make sure that I have represented them correctly. This is what I think I heard. That's what you're telling me. And I've been very successful in that way. Eventually, these oral interviews will come to UCR Library, to the special collections.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, let me add this, Steve. The interview with Larry Eddy, though, I did with the National Library of Medicine. And so at Bethesda, Maryland, they have this interview on a DVD because it was filmed. They had a film crew to do this. I was the person doing the interviewing, but I interviewed 2 Chimwevis and then some Mojaves as well about Indian health. So those are available to the public, I would think. I haven't tried to access them.
Sure. Well, thank you. Let's see. Next question is from Charlie Eaton saying, Cliff, thank you. It's great to see you again. Could you help me understand the familiar or familiars? Is that a spirit guide, and do all tribes embrace that concept?
All tribes that I know embrace this concept that people can have a familiar. So in the case of Mr. Eddy's father, although he did not tell me, other Chimwevi says, oh, this is common knowledge that his power was the bat. Mm-hmm. And it lived in the mountains, and then the spirits like to hear songs and songs about them that the that the shaman is singing, sometimes learning the song from the familiar. And so they sing it again and again, and it attracts them. And in this oral interview, so the familiar arrives, and Mr. Eddy said, as a child, he saw it. He saw this bat land on the ground, but no one else saw it. And he said, you know, you would think, Cliff, that familiar would come right to my grandpa, but it didn't. It just kind of, you know, was out there and about, ignoring him. And my grandfather ignored it until it came closer and closer because it wanted to be recognized. And then he grabbed it and picked it up and had it in his hand. And then he could do the power. So this is not uncommon in Indian country. Does everybody have a familiar? Absolutely not, because that kind of work is not being done. But there are some people who have that kind of power, sometimes not coming to them through a familiar, but through say a plant medicine that is given to them in a religious way, in a spiritual way. So my friend Kenneth Kusawun, who was a Comanche shaman, he was tending a fire. The fire sparked, and it was those pieces of charcoal, when he was told to pick them up, that became his medicine. And he said he could pray for them, for it, and it would come to him wherever he was. And then he would make the people he was doctoring eat it and put it into their body. But he wanted to make sure they always swallowed it.
So that's an important point that I picked up. I mean, for the first time by reading your book, is that the familiars were not just animals. I mean, there were other
yes,
things that could be familiars.
So it could be a cloud, it could be water. I saw a shaman once using water with his eagle feathers to sprinkle on people. I've seen shaman put water in their mouth and then blow it on people as a blessing, as a cleansing. So water can be a familiar too.
Thank you. Next question is, how is the coronavirus being handled right now on the reservations?
Oh, it is raging on certain reservations. You know, we've seen the news about the Navajo reservation, which is the largest native population on a reservation today. But my contacts on different reservations, especially on the Colorado River, on Quetzan, at Fort Yuma, at Crit, the Colorado River Indian Reservation. So it's out of control. It's not good. And they have a health system there, but it's been impacted like all our health systems, and they're not getting enough testing done. They don't have enough respirators. They're having to send patients away to Phoenix or, you know, to other hospitals. But I don't know the numbers, and I was going to propose to NEH a research project to do oral interviews to try to learn what is happening on reservations, because it's happened so fast, you know, to try to find out and to track it. But when I do make telephone calls to friends on reservation, I always ask them, you know, how are things there? You know, on Palma, for example, in San Diego County, we heard from Dr. Kalak, he's at Rincon Reservation in North San Diego County. He's a medical doctor from Harvard, but he's a tribal member down there. And he said that they have it pretty well under control, but they're worried. It seems to be escalating. And he's worried because their clinics are not very big affairs. And I don't know that they have respirators, at least not many at all. They're so expensive.
The next question is, are there younger practicing shamans in our local counties? And is this tradition fading away among young Native peoples?
Steve, I don't know if you can hear me, but I couldn't hear you. So
okay,
let's try it again.
Absolutely.
Can you ask again?
Sure. Are there younger practicing shamans in our local counties, in our local region? And is this tradition fading away among young Native peoples?
The last old-time shaman in Southern California passed away in the 1970s. But that's not to say that there isn't Native medicine, but there are not practicing shaman as we would have had them before World War II. And what I hear from elders is that the major break took place when people went off to either work in defense plants or went off to fight World War II. And when they came back, there was a gap in knowledge and people had to go to work in order to make a living. That times had changed. So the times of hunting and gathering or fishing for the river people, I'm thinking that the people here weren't doing a great deal of fishing. Coastal people, yes, but not inland people. But it broke down. But there are people who of power on reservations, and there are certainly herbal doctors, and there are prayer leaders. So I know certain people who will go and help other people. They won't claim to be shaman because that's something that ended back in the 1970s. But they are prayer leaders and they try to help other people. And I think that's really commendable by praying and singing, and there are prayer leaders.
Let's see. The next question is, individual Justin Wise thanks you and then asks, in your research, did you come across how many nurses and doctors were spread throughout California on Native communities? And also, after relocation and termination, did any of the nurses possibly stay working with the reservations since they were so dedicated and had dedicated so much of their time?
That's a good question. I can't say what the number is because the nurses would come in and they would go out. But most of them were public health nurses and county health nurses already. And then they were being assigned to, and being paid for by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This is certainly true in the Corps that in San Diego County, who had their own Corps down there. It was still part of the Mission Indian Agency, but like two divisions. And so the division up here working with Riverside County and Riverside County and San Bernardino County, those nurses stayed on and worked for the county. I know of a few that decided to get married, and then I don't know if they continued as nurses or not, but they were no longer working, certainly with the Indian Service. So I have not tracked the nurses beyond 1948 to 1950, but my sense is they continued to work for the counties because this was their home by that time.
Interesting. Another question is, how may I read the oral histories you recorded and transcribed in the past? Are they at UCR? And you've really already answered that they're not yet at UCR.
Not yet, no.
One question is UCR's medical school getting involved with local tribes?
The answer is yes, I'm pleased to say. A group of us in the humanities were part of the creation of the medical school, and we had a strong interest in community health and wanting there to be a relationship. So for the last 4 years, we've had a major project that Juliet McMullen, chair of anthropology, a medical anthropologist,
right,
and our new acting dean.
Exactly.
She's just a wonderful person. So, and she had worked for years with Native people in Hawaii and here in the United States, and wanted to continue that with her appointment in the medical school. So yes, the first 2 years of the gathering of good minds was about getting to know each other, not rushing in and having some proposal that we do something for the tribes, but rather get to know each other. And then the last 2 years, we've worked on a project that they wanted to do on historical trauma. And what we did was something practical besides just receiving information from the community, telling us about historical trauma in their families and their communities and their tribes, that we used that and created a curriculum. We did this with Riverside San Bernardino Indian Health. And the curriculum is for doctors and nurses, healthcare providers who work for the tribes, with the tribes, but have no experience with Native people, so that they understand Southern California Indians better than whatever stereotype might be in their head about what they've seen in the movies about
Mhm.
All Indians wear feathers, all Indians ride horses and live in teepees, that sort of thing. So it's been a wonderful project, and we're working with San Bernardino Riverside Indian Health to expand on that in the future. So little by little, yes, we are. And we're hoping to channel people from the reservation and help train them so that they can become doctors and nurses as well and return to their communities.
That's fantastic. Let's see. Another question is it possible for you to give a talk with a living shaman present to help us understand plant herbal medicine? And as you're saying, the last shaman passed in the 70s.
Yes, and I'm sorry that we're doing this talk now, in as much as we lost a Kenneth Kusawoon in 2018 in January, but he used to come to campus to our Medicine Ways conference and give talks, and then there was such a high demand for him. Such a lovely person. He was 87, 88, 89 when we lost him, but he would come here, and then people would ask that he help them. So, for example, I was not part of this, but he was walking the hall, and this woman came up with her baby who had some sort of sickness and was not doing well. It looked like the baby was going to die. So he worked on that baby. And the next year when he came back, the baby had survived and was thriving. And the doctors felt that this was a real miracle. So not only did he give talks about how he worked and how the power came to him, but in addition, he would doctor people if they needed it, just in privacy. He would just take them aside. And I know there are naysayers out there who don't believe in this medicine, but I've seen miracles. I don't have that power, but I have seen people use that power to help others. And usually the medicine people, they don't like to be called medicine men usually, or medicine women. They don't mind healer, but they usually say, I just help people. I've been asked to help other people, which is something I left out of my talk, that we train doctors and nurses through the university and through medical schools and nursing schools, but there is some training of shamans, but there has to be a gift given to them, or they can't access the highest level of power. That our people here call that, the Kauias called it a pool amnawat. That is the highest level, and amnawat is like you're closest to the creator. You're been given this gift and asked to do this work, and you're expected to do it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I picked up as I read through the book was that if you abuse that power, you can also lose it. That's
right. That's right. And so power can be used in a negative way too, to harm people. In the English language, we may call it witchcraft. Mm-hmm. But you're doing stuff to do harm to other people, and you can get paid to do that. Mm-hmm. And there are people that do that today. And so people are careful about who they're dealing with and what you're saying, because the person close to you, when I worked on Navajo, I was warned about this, to be careful in classes saying too much about witchcraft and negative stuff, because that could have an impact on my students, and that person next to me might know of a person who does negative medicine and harms people. Yeah, it's not a laughing matter. It's very real to the people who believe this way, that there is negative medicine.
Sure, absolutely. One question that has been posted is, are there physicians that you know of who are practicing with Native Americans who combine traditional tribal medicine along with Western medicine?
Well, I don't know anybody personally. I do know some Native American doctors who will pray with, they would not say that they're shaman, but they would not think twice about asking a shaman to come and help, or an herbal specialist to come and help, or a prayer leader to come and help, or they would pray with them. So I could name those folks. but I don't know if Dr. Kalak does that. I would imagine that he does, but I've not asked him. I keep mentioning Dr. Kalak because he's such a nice guy. And he was on a summer program. We have a summer program with Native American students who are high school students and middle school. And he was our guest speaker just last Friday. And he gives of his time. He's come to UCR to share with our students. He gives out his phone number, his cell number, call me if you need me. He's that kind of guy. He's just a wonderful tribal member and a wonderful doctor. But I would imagine he does, but I just haven't asked him.
Understood, understood. Let's see. One comment that the individuals made is that her cousin works for the Indian Health Service in Alaska, and the different tribal elders initially denied white doctors access to their people because they were afraid of the COVID-19, or that COVID-19 would be spread to them, just like in the past with miners and other settlers. Disease and pain have long memories. Let's see, the next question is, do regional tribes attribute a deeper meaning to the COVID-19 pandemic? For example, do they see this as a sign of massive world change or end of times?
You know, I've not heard that from anyone, but I know, let me give you an example. You know, I was in the Northwest when Mount St. Helens exploded. And when they told us on the news, I was in Eastern Washington, almost on the Idaho border at Washington State University. So we heard ash was coming. So in my mind, ash was like burning fields in Yuma, where I grew up. But that's not what came out. It was like concrete coming out of the sky and falling. And not long afterwards, I was on the Yakima Reservation to see an elder there. Her name's Mary Jim. She's now gone. But Mary told me that the reason that the mountain blew is that the Creator is speaking to us. Not that non-Indians, but Indian people are not following their traditional ways. And this was a message to the older people. They needed to do a better job with younger people to keep them moving as Palouse, Yakima, Nez Perce, to act in accordance with tribal laws that had been given to them at the time of creation. And so I'm writing this down because that's fascinating. It's not that the non-Indian population has done something to us, but rather we are not following our traditions, so we know better. So we need to do a better job. Another message came from the environment. I was just reading a manuscript I'm writing on Willie Boy. The night before William Mike left 29 poems to go down to Banning to the Gilman Ranch to work, a major thunderstorm came. And the mountain there was his mountain. That would be right to the south of 29. And the thunder was speaking to him, and it warned him that something really bad was going to happen. And we know this because a non-Indian was there at the time. William Mike told this man in English, told him what he said, and this guy wrote to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. So I have this note to the commissioner from this non-Indian saying, this is what he told us. And then this terrible thing happens with William Mike being murdered. But there can be signs like that. There can be messages, even today.
Thank you. Next question I see is there a clear connection between the larger termination/relocation program and the eugenics movement that was so prevalent in California?
You know, I have not examined that, but that connection, I had not made that in my mind, but that makes all the sense in the world to me. You know, and I don't know the votes coming out of California I don't know what the votes for or against termination, but there was this national movement that really was rolling after World War II, and in reaction to the New Deal programs, and all this spending and all this liberalism and creeping socialism. So one of the things to hit was a very vulnerable population where federal money was going to help the tribes, and it had increased during the New Deal period. So it wouldn't be surprising to me that California people who were into eugenics and who were political people, combined this kind of concept. But I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Another question is about the Medicine Way Conference. Does it still exist? Does it still happen?
We were not able to do it this year for the first time in many years, but it happens every year in the spring, and everyone is invited. It's an all-day Saturday event. We gather money and we feed everybody who comes and joins us. There are different sessions, and some of them are how-to. So we might have Kenneth speaking on native medicine, but somebody over here gives a program on bird songs and teaches a couple of bird songs to whoever attends, or basket making, or it can be anything. So we have different themes every year, and yes, we plan on doing it in the spring of 2021. If we can all congregate. But it's open to the public. I urge everybody to come. It is wonderful. It's just a lovely day. And it ends at 5, 6 o'clock, then bird singers take over and they sing to us. And there's bird singing and dancing from Kauai's and Serrano people, some Chimwevis, some people in the river will come over as well. It's a very nice event on campus. And much different than our powwow, which is not Southern California, but this is a real focus on Southern California people.
Great. Let's see, I think I lost the flow. So next question is, you mentioned that World War II caused a break in the shaman tradition. I was interested if any of the oral history participants you interviewed had been forced to attend one of the Native American boarding schools and were able to subsequently reclaim their shaman heritage, or the shaman.
That's a great question. So I know of one very good example. I'm trying to remember his name was Bill Franklin. So Bill Franklin was Miwok from the Sacramento Valley to the east a little bit, the Ione Band. And as a little boy, he and his sister were taken to Sherman. And his sister really, I can't remember her first name, but she was a Franklin and she loved Sherman. She loved learning. And, she just thought this was great. This little boy hated it. And ultimately he fled Sherman, which at the time it had no fence around it. Today you go there and there's a big barbed wire fence around it today. I'm not sure if that's to keep the kids in or the folks out, but he took off as a little boy, and he was in grade school, and he walked all the way back to his village, and he became a very strong shaman. His picture is in the State Indian Museum. He's extremely well known. He's now gone, but he was a man of power. He sang, he prayed, he had his medicine dance, and then he healed people. Now, I met him in passing, but I never attended ceremony or anything like that. But he is extremely well known today. He's famous, and he just had nothing to do with the boarding schools. There is a book out there. It's called Sun Chief. I think Yale did it initially. I don't know if Yale did the most recent edition, but this is about a Hopi man who came to Sherman, and he talks all about Riverside and the orange groves, how much fun they had, but also that he didn't quite fit in and didn't really want to to be a part of the boarding school system. He nearly dies. He nearly died, I think it was pneumonia. And they even brought a casket in that he remembered them bringing in, getting ready for him. And then he is visited by a spirit helper who takes him on a spirit journey back to Hopi. And then you got to read the book. But he does not become a shaman, but he becomes a sun chief. He is a recorder of time, so that they know ceremonial time and when to do agriculture by watching the sun for a year, and then keeping records of that, and then informing the tribe. So he is a chief in that way. It's an interesting book.
That's fantastic. I think we have time for one last question. And I do apologize for those that have asked questions that we've not been able to get to, but I think this is a really appropriate one from Shivan Hinman. Question is, big question. What is the single most beautiful thing you've personally learned through your research and oral histories?
Oh, I would say the friendship that and receptions I've gotten from individuals and families. They are gifting me knowledge, and they are trusting me that I will handle their knowledge correctly. So sometimes I've been told, I'm going to tell you this, Cliff, but I don't want you to write about it. And so I've honored that for all my life. You know, it's just correct. But they tell me things that I can share that are just amazing. Just quickly, I had a 2-year project with the Quetzans at Fort Yuma. And this was paid for by the Corps of Engineers and a grant that came to UCR. And it took me 2 years to convince the Quetzans they really ought to do this to protect their sacred lands on the Yuma Proving Ground. And finally, they agreed to it because I had grown up there, and they knew that I had learned from one of their major teachers, Lee Emerson, who went to Sherman, by the way. And so they shared with me just incredible knowledge about the sacredness of the landscape and why it was sacred. And they took me to places and then would tell me stories about how this place came to be and why is it important to them. And I was able to share this with the Army, but they asked me not to publish this until, to wait and come back to them. And, you know, I guess a little more testing time. I have not gone back to them, but I am going to, because I'd like to write about their sacred landscape. So it's the gifting has been the most wonderful, beautiful thing that's come to me. Lifelong friendships that are just incredible. It's an enriching thing that unless you do this kind of work, you don't receive the gift back like that.
Well, Cliff, I want to thank you for giving us the amazing gift of your time, your wisdom, your words. This has really been a really special hour, and
Thank you.
we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
A pleasure to me.
Yes, thank you, Cliff, so much for sharing such dynamic information with us. And thank you, Steve, for leading us in that conversation. So as was mentioned, this event is recorded and it will be available within 48 hours on the UCR Library's website. And I'll go ahead and drop that link for you in the chat box. So please make sure you bookmark it so you know about all of the events that we have coming up. Also, please make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter so you can stay in the loop of what we have going on. The next event in this series is scheduled for October 8th, featuring Stu Krieger, titled That One Cigarette. So please join us, go to the website for more information, and please spread the word. Thank you again for being with us tonight, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.